always insightful to speak to the people who have been deeply involved with the things that most of us usually only read about. I often use the line from Hamilton when referring to these people as the ones who were in the room where it happened. And today's guest has been in many of those rooms, from the room where companies like Apple brought us life-changing innovations to rooms in Microsoft, Google, and recent game-changing companies like Canva. He has written 15 books beginning in 1987 with The Macintosh Way. His latest 2 books are Wise Guy and The Art of the Start 2.0. And for obvious reasons, I'm a fan of his podcasts, and which we'll talk about that later on in the conversation. So let's get to the conversation, and welcome to the podcast, Guy Kawasaki.
Thank you, Lee Judge. It's a privilege and an honor to be here.
Welcome, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. So to start out, Guy, rather than going through the traditional origin story, I want to hear from you about 2 or 3 of the biggest groundbreaking technologies that you were part of before they broke ground.
Obviously, number one is Macintosh. I joined the Macintosh division in September of 1983. It was not announced till January of 1984. And I have started and funded a handful of companies, so I was involved with many of them, but most of them were kind of singles, maybe doubles, not home runs. The true home run, the out-of-the-park grand slam, 7th inning, point to the stands and say, okay, I'm going to hit it there. That's definitely Canva. So Canva is just rocking. So I basically conveniently tell people that I started with Apple. I worked at a Google division in the middle, and then I worked with Canva. So I'm 3 for 3. Now,
3 for 3.
Yeah, it's total bullshit. I'm really 3 for 30. But, the victor gets to define.
It's his story,
history.
Right?
It's my history to write, God damn it.
Yeah, and if you attempt to Google or WikiGuy, you'll see a long resume of those other 30. But you always notice those ones that stick out, like the Apples and Googles and now Canva, right?
Well, I mean, if you had to pick 3 companies to stick out, Apple, Google, and Canva, and Mercedes-Benz would not be bad examples. Yeah.
So I want to get into this. You popularized, I guess, going back to Apple, this title of Chief Evangelist.
Yeah.
And
well, there was Jesus before me. But yeah, there's a 2,000-year gap.
Chief, yeah,
the head cheese
executive, yeah, the head cheese evangelist. And I've heard you, and I'm glad you mentioned it that way. I've heard you describe evangelist as someone who brings the good news.
Yes.
So share with us more about what that role looks like today and why any company would need a chief evangelist.
Yes. So to repeat what you said a little bit, evangelism comes from a Greek word meaning bringing the good news. So what an evangelist does is bring the good news. There was this other guy with the initials JC. He brought the good news of eternal life. I brought the good news of increased creativity and productivity with a computer called Macintosh. I am currently bringing the good news that you can become a better communicator with Canva because it enables you to become a good graphic designer. So good news is better communication, better designing, more creativity, more productivity. So that's the good news that I, as an evangelist, brought. Now, I would make the case that evangelism is probably the purest form of sales or the purest form of marketing. And by that, I mean that everybody in sales and marketing is trying to make their quota, their budget, their bonus, their year end. Don't get me wrong, and so am I. But the difference is that evangelists have the other person's best interest at heart also. Not only, but also, and also not secondarily. So when I tell you to use Macintosh, there's no doubt in my mind that I'm doing you a favor. Well, I don't know about a favor, but I'm at least not doing you an injustice by telling you to use a piece of crap. I am pretty sure you're going to be more creative and productive. And when I tell you to use Canva, I am absolutely positively certain that you will be able to create graphics in minutes, like faster than you could boot Photoshop, you can finish a graphic in Canva. So
I'll tell you, the day I converted, I love you said that about the boot, because the day I converted from Photoshop to Canva, and there's a place for them both, but that particular day, I was in a rush and literally didn't have time to pull up Photoshop and find a template or whatever and start designing. And I said, this can just as well be done in Canva. Let me just go ahead and convert and do Canva right now. So definitely
believe.
I believe.
I believe.
If an evangelist can get you to say I believe, then that evangelist has done their job, right?
Come on down, Lee Judge.
So I want to tie a few of the things you just said together, talking about, your roles as chief evangelist, and you mentioned, executives and salespeople. Talking about what you shared about those two things and looking at your books and your knowledge on social media, I want to talk about how executives approach social media. I've seen in most business organizations, there seems to be this struggle when it comes to who can really speak freely on social media about a product. Executives are too conservative, sales folks are too salesy, and the most creative people in marketing aren't empowered to be trusted to be vocal.
The short answer to who can speak freely on social media is no one, frankly. Now, for different reasons, the chief executive has fiduciary responsibility. The salesman has his or her reputation. Even politicians, whatever you say on social media will come up in a congressional hearing one day. So no one can truly speak freely. But I will say that, the advice you're looking for, and the advice I am happy to give, is what should be your sort of overall philosophy of social media as a business? And I like to cite what I call the NPR or Wikipedia model. Now, those two organizations provide great services, provide great amount of information. And every year, or NPR, 4 times a year, I swear, they hit you with the pledge drive, right? And you're listening to NPR, and all of a sudden, Terry Gross or somebody, Pete Sagal says, oh, and it's our pledge time drive. And so now, standing by our operators. And if you call 1-800-NPR and donate $15 a month, we will give you a free hand crank radio so that in the event of a nuclear holocaust, you can find out when you're going to die. Call now. Microsoft is matching you dollar for dollar for the first $1,000. And none of us like to hear that, right? But guess what? Not only do we tolerate the ad, we actually freaking give money. Wikipedia is the same thing. Every fall or so, they put out the world's ugliest banner ads featuring Jimmy Wales asking for money. And my God, if you sat down and said, I'm going to make the ugliest ad, what should I do? You would create what Wikipedia does. Wikipedia should use Canva, as a matter of fact. But anyway, I digress. And now, when you see that banner, what do? You donate. Wikipedia gets, I think, 70, 80, 90 million dollars of donations. Now, why is that? Why can they put a heinous looking thing in the middle of your face and you actually donate? It's because you feel a moral obligation to reciprocate for what they have done. NPR has given you value. Wikipedia has given you value. So what I like to tell people is think like them. You want to give value. And if you give value, you're not necessarily going to ask for money in the sense of a donation, but you're going to ask for their patronage, for their business, for tolerating their promotions at the very least. And I think that's the model. So if you are an airline, it's not about pimping your new leg from San Diego to San Antonio. It's about, here's an article about how to prepare for TSA post-pandemic. What happens in a TSA line now? What does it mean to have global entry versus clear versus, whatever? What do those 3 levels mean? How should you pack for an overnight? What should you do if someone is going crazy on a plane? Do you get involved? Do you stay out of it? Another piece of advice is, okay, so suppose you're flying to Austin. These are the 25 best food trucks in Austin. So you provide this kind of value. And then I think people feel like, the airlines gave me this great idea about where to eat and how to pack and, whether I should get clear or global entry. And so I don't mind when they tell me they have a new flight from San Diego to San Antonio. And so I think you have to earn the right to promote. And that's what social media should be about. And it is by providing content, not advertising.
You talk about that content and how the person receiving it receives that content and they want the value.
Yes.
And bringing this actually even back to Canva, I've had a lot of creative jobs in my career. I was a professional DJ, a web designer, graphic designer, audio producer. All this creative content, in general, the end user didn't care how it was made. They just wanted that value.
Yeah.
In each one of those professions, you'll find hardcore platform purists, Photoshop, people who insist on doing things a traditional way and that you're not professional if you don't use the industry standard tools. So
that's bullshit.
I was hoping you'd say that. Because eventually you have to bend, right? Eventually technology will force those purists to bend and give in, right?
Absolutely. And eventually you have to bend. Eventually people who are not encumbered by your, locked in habits are going to be competing with you, or if not in another company, maybe in your own company. And quite frankly, all people really care about are results. I've never seen anybody say, Guy, I need you to create a beautiful graphic for me in Photoshop.
Said no one ever.
Right. They don't care. Yeah, they don't care if you rub two sticks together. They don't care if you use a Mac 128K and Mac Paint. All they care about is the result. And so that's all you should care about. To use a surfing analogy, there are surfing purists, and they believe that, you need to use a short board with this kind of thing, and, you need to do all this kind of stuff. But really, the bottom line is, for your own psyche, and also for people watching you, they either see you catch the wave and have fun, or you don't. They don't look at, wow, look at he has a short board with this kind of rail and this kind of nose and this kind of tail and this kind of, whatever. You either caught the ride and had fun or you didn't. That's it. It's kind of simple.
I like your analogy. I used to say when I was teaching DJs, quit DJing for DJs. Because the audience doesn't care what your equipment is. They don't care how you did it. They just want to have fun and enjoy themselves.
Right.
They're not analyzing it.
Absolutely. I could make the same case with a chef, right? So, when's the last time you went into a kitchen and said, you're not using the right Japanese knife, right? You're not using the right blender. You're not using the Cuisinart, whatever. You're not using the Wolf Range or the La Cornue oven or whatever, right? Nobody gives a shit. It either tastes good or it doesn't.
Right. Well, I know you've seen a lot of world-changing technologies go from crazy ideas to proven technology. So as an investor, how does that shape the way you see new ideas and improving technology when it's presented to you today?
Well, if I were intellectually honest, I would admit that when you first see something that becomes a huge success, I would say 90% of the time you have no freaking idea. And it's only later that you say, well, of course I knew Canva would be successful. Honestly, let's be honest, right? Between Apple and Canva, I thought I was right about 30 times. At no point in those 30 companies that I started or invested in, at no point did I say, this is a dumb shit company, but I'm going to do it anyway. This is a piss poor executive team. Every time I squeezed the trigger, I thought I was right. Well, I was wrong 27 out of 30 times. So now maybe it's just that Guy is a loser, but I tell you what, man, you start with Apple, you end with Canva. Nobody's going to call you a loser.
No, not at all. Not at all. Well, even after let's just look at those three, for example. Even after you get those three and they're winners, there's still a cycle of learning and product development and changing along the way.
Yeah.
So,
there's nothing easy.
Right. So I want to ask you about this. I'm a big fan of, when I can, function over form. And my favorite brand sometimes puts form over function. And right now my mouse might go dead because I can't plug it in because the plug's under the mouse. So when you
Hey, I
when
hear
you
you, man. I hear you.
you've been
Like
in the room where those
like
decisions
what
have happened.
happened?
Yeah. How does that happen? And do you have any stories to tell of how you know that,
Well,
you know, there's a
we're,
reason
we're
behind
gonna
that?
okay, Lee Judge. We're gonna go down a deep cesspool hole right now. I mean, but you
I'm ready. I'm I'm holding on.
you opened a man cover. Okay, not me. So you bring up a good example, right? So your mouse, like, what in God's name was in that person's head when they said, let's make the charger so that when you plug it in charge, it's underneath and you can't use the mouse? I don't understand. Like, and then listen, I have the latest iMac, and there are, I don't know, 4 USB-C terminal plugs,
Ports.
right?
Mhm.
4, right? Ports. And so I look at that, I say, okay, so, you know, I don't know about Apple, but have they ever figured out that the Dymo label printer is USB-A? And I'm using a Rodecaster Pro, right? And so that's USB-A. I'm going from a Sony camera to HDMI cable, and that was USB-A and a USB-A. And I swear, some of my computers, this is how pathetic it is. The dongles have dongles. My dongle has a dongle.
Yeah.
Like, wrap your head around that. Wrap your head. Yeah. Steve Jobs, you're up there. Okay, listen to me, Steve. Why does my dongle need a dongle? I mean, obviously, Tim Cook does not print Dymo labels. Obviously, he's not connecting to a Rodecaster. Obviously, he does not use a DSLR because there is no more place to put the SD or micro SD card in. He doesn't use a GoPro either, right?
Yeah.
And so you look at all that, you say, what the hell? Now, let's be honest here. So it could be that you, Lee Judge, and me, Guy Kawasaki, we are the only 2 losers in the world who do all that. Everybody else, all they ever need to do is plug in one cable. Power. And you know what? Statistically, they might be right. It may be that of the 50 million Macs they sell a year, 49,500,000 are like that. It's freaking millennials sitting in Starbucks and, if anything, they're plugging in their power. But there's 500,000 of us. And I tell you something, we need SD. We need HDMI. Yeah. We need multiple USB-C. And my God, it would sure be nice to have USB-A so we don't have to have dongles with dongles.
I was heading for a flight last week, and I was like, why is my backpack so damn heavy? And so I go through pulling it out. I was like, oh, crap, dongle, adapter, dongle. So, okay, I'm not going to connect to a projector this trip. No Rodecaster this trip. Oh, wait, I might connect to my headphones. So it's like a magic trick in and out of the hat of what dongles I need for that trip.
And on my iMac, I swear there is no headphone jack, right? So now I got to take my headphone, which has the little stereo thing, right? The stereo mini plug. And I got to find an adapter that goes from that to USB-C.
Mm-hmm.
We'll let that one go. Yeah. Okay, so end of the bitch session. So now, why does that happen?
Yeah.
And I guess one theory is these executives, they sit in a smoke-filled room and they say, well, if we took out one USB-A port, we could save 20 cents per MacBook Air, and we make 2 million MacBooks Air. So 20 cents times 2 million, it's a lot of money. So maybe that's it. Or take the fact that now, until very recently, if you plugged in your MacBook to charge, from across the room, you could see that the light was green, right? The LED light is on. So you're charging.
Yeah, not anymore.
Not anymore. Right now, you got to open it up and look for the Thunderbolt. And, let's say you go to Europe and you take your hotel card out of the door. You take your hotel card out of the door, that little container that turns on all the power for the room, right? So you leave, you plug in your computer. You know, right? It's charging. You walk to the door, you pull out the plug and you leave, and you come back and it's not charged. Like, why is that? The light was on. It was green when I left. Well, how would you have noticed that? Because you don't exactly go to the door, pull out the hotel room key, go back to the computer, open it up, look for the lightning bolt. That's not how people leave a room.
Meanwhile, your door's propped open so you can see how to get back to it.
Exactly.
It's the light from the hallway.
Now, like miracle upon miracle, if you look at today's MacBook Pro, it has a mag, it has the little green light to show charging. Of course, it's using a completely different port. So everything else that you bought, every charger you have doesn't work anymore, right? And now it has HDMI, and it has SD, and it has multiple USB-C. So obviously somebody was listening for the two of us.
Yeah.
But I mean, I
support people.
I just don't get it. But again, statistically, maybe they are right. Maybe 99.99% of the people only ever stick power in one USB-C port. That may be true. But I'm telling you, it's hell. And it would be interesting to see the ratio of dongles to computers in the world. Because in the Macintosh world, I bet it's, I don't know if it's 1-to-1.
Well, maybe for that 20 cents they saved per port, they also made $2 per dongle they sold.
Yeah. Well, but I'm buying my dongles from Anchor. I'm not buying my dongles from it. Because if you bought an Apple dongle, it would be like $200, right? I mean,
I'll go through 3 throwaway Anchor.
And so, going down an even deeper hole. So I read these stories in CNET or Verve or, whatever, and Apple Car on the horizon. Apple Car loses executive. Apple Car gains Tesla executive. I mean, Apple Car is the last car in the world I would buy because
car dongle then.
Yeah, well, first of all, okay, so let's just be honest here. So let's say there's an entire infrastructure of Tesla chargers and Electrify America and ChargePoint and all that, right? Now, if Apple decides to not use a proprietary form of electricity, which is a big if, but let's just assume they don't, I guarantee you that the Apple Car will contain a port that requires a $2,000 dongle to work with the Tesla charger and the EA charger. I guarantee you. And I guarantee you that Apple Car will be smoking fast and sexy and really great, but it can only go 75 miles. I guarantee you. But it's going to be the best freaking 75 miles of your life.
That
once
is literally
a day.
The car version of a MacBook Pro.
I mean, let's face it. Like Apple executives, let's take the Apple Watch. Now, I don't know about you, but when I use my Apple Watch for activities like surfing, which is a highly active sport, tracking waves, if I go out for 2 or 3 hours, I use half the battery. Okay, so the question is, if you are an Apple user, and I like to have a watch on my wrist 24/7, sometimes when I'm awake, sometimes in the middle of the night. I just want to go like that and see what time it is, right? Well, you have to make a choice. Either your Apple Watch can track your surfing, or it can be available at night. But you can't have both because, God forbid, somebody at Apple didn't figure out that there's 24 hours in a day. So, I mean, these are things that I don't understand, but this is not the point of your podcast.
Well, no, but it's interesting though, and the hard part is not to join in and just keep on going because I have the same. Not to mention this is looking me in the eye right now with this port, so Yeah,
let yourself go, Lee. Just let it rip, baby. I mean,
well, yeah. Meanwhile, I'm also We made these complaints, but I'm still a fanboy. I'm still surrounded by Mac products.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I have. Let's see. I own 3 iMacs, 2 PowerBooks, 2 iPads, one phone, one watch. And at any point, I have bought about 8 tags. I only know where 4 of them are, but I bought 8.
I didn't know how many I had until I had a problem with my internet, and I was on the phone with Xfinity, and the lady says, "My God, you got 50 devices." And I was like, "That's not possible. There's a problem here."
Seriously, 50? 50?
Well, because the thermostats, the echoes, all those things,
doorknobs,
everything, and then I realized that out of those, probably 15 were Apple products. So I was like, damn, are there that many things going on around here? So, yeah.
You better hope it doesn't cause cancer because, man.
I am glowing right now. And the bad part is Amazon knows it. They know I'm glowing because they probably know the exact amount of glow I have right now because they're measuring it.
Speaking of Amazon, man, I subscribe to a kind of water that had nothing to do with anything, but yeah, I found this great water in aluminum cans. I'm trying to de-plastic our house. So can we go down another rat hole?
Well, meanwhile, somebody's trying to deluminize their house.
Well, yeah, that's true too. But it's better to be using aluminum cans than plastic bottles, right? I hope that's my assumption.
Oil. Yeah,
because aluminum cans are kind of infinitely recyclable, whereas plastic bottles, for all the news you hear about, someone's figured out a plastic eating bacteria, or they figured out how to make jackets out of plastic bottles or whatever. It's a tiny percentage of plastic bottles that actually end up getting recycled, and I think aluminum cans is a much higher number.
I used to work in the industry. I was a marketing director for a recycling firm, and I got totally messed up on the whole industry because I saw the inside of how it worked and saw how most of what was quote unquote recycled was not actually recycled.
Where does it go?
Driven
China?
By the industry, huh?
It goes to China or Africa or someplace like that?
Well, that was the thing. I mean, the culmination of that was once upon a time, and I guess it was in the late or early 2000s when the plant just piled up all this plastic. And we're like, why is there a warehouse full of plastic, some of it drying out in the sun? Problem was China wasn't buying it. And so meanwhile, you have a city with a contract for a whole year to collect this plastic, but the collector in the middle has nowhere to sell it to. And
so what happened?
They can't be caught going to the landfill with it. Can't do that because they'll be seen as throwing it away. They'll be against their contract. China's not buying it. So it just piled up and piled up and piled up. Needless to say, they're bankrupt. They went out of business because they got caught in the middle. They got caught as a middleman. They had paper, plastics, and as you mentioned, aluminum. The metal was the only thing they could move for a while. But the plastics, it was too dependent on the markets. And the city contracts were written in a way that says, you agree, you will take it from us and not put it in the garbage. The problem was that holding period.
Yeah. Huh. Wow.
Yeah. So when the wife says, why aren't we recycling? I was like, well, it really doesn't work that way. So we're not going to do it. Yeah. So a lot of caveat there. So we talked about products for a minute. I want to pivot back a little bit and talk to the listeners to the podcast who are entrepreneurs. And I often hear from investor friends, and I know you're an investor, that they rarely, if ever, are interested in service-based companies, I guess for scalability reasons, unless they have productized their service.
Yeah.
So what can service-based companies learn perhaps from product-based companies in regards to scaling and becoming more investable?
Well, I have several thoughts here. So first of all, one must separate what is a venture capital fundable company from a viable company. And if you can only have one, I suggest you pick viability, not fundability. So, for example, some dumbass social media, idea to, I don't know what, AARP for seniors. I don't know what, that is a fundable idea. You say, well, Facebook has, 12 billion people, but seniors on Facebook, they're looking for someplace that's safer, bigger, I don't know, whatever, right? So we believe there's a niche of seniors and AARP is going to support us and blah, blah, blah. So that's a fundable idea. That's not a viable idea. I mean, Devin Nunes says, I'm going to create with Donald Trump, I'm going to create a social media for QAnon and American Nazi Party members. And, I guess that's not fundable or viable, I guess. But anyway, so the important thing for entrepreneurs is to separate fundability from viability. You may have a perfectly viable company. Maybe you just want to sell socks, or maybe you just want to make the best chili, or maybe you want to make the best hot sauce. I believe you could be 2, 3, 4, 5. If you hit a home run, $20 million company. I believe that. You can have a really nice existence, sell it for $20 million when you're, 60 years old. Life is good. That would have never been a fundable company. A venture capitalist is not saying, God, if I only own the hot sauce market, if I only own the t-shirt business, if I only own the web consulting business. And so that's what I'm trying to communicate to people is the venture capital game is a very specific game. It is for companies that could become the next Apple, Google, Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, or Canva. And those kinds of business have to have tens of millions of customers. There is no way that many of these companies that are service companies are going to be tens of millions of customers. Now, maybe if you have a dog walking service, you might do the calculation. 300 million Americans, 1 in 4 owns a dog, 75 million dogs. Not all of those dogs are with millennials who need them to be walked, but let's just say at least the total market is 75 million. Let's be conservative. Maybe you can get 8 million dogs to be your customers, 8 million dogs, X per month. Yeah, maybe you come up with 100, 200 million in revenue. I can kind of understand that, but even that's a stretch. And so my recommendation for entrepreneurs is you have to consider what kind of company you have. And it may not be a venture capital deal, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And it doesn't mean it's not viable. If you wanted to create the ultimate store for selling, jackets, jackets.com is probably not a venture capital funded business, but it is probably a viable business. And so you need to separate those two. And then people need to remember that the purpose of a company is to create customers, not to raise money. I think many entrepreneurs, they get so obsessed with raising money, they think once you raise money, that's the hard part. It's done. The hard part begins when you raise money. And if they have this fantasy that they're going to raise smart money that's going to add value, well, I have some oceanfront property in Arizona to sell them too. So, the venture capital game is for very rarefied air. And I think venture capitalists fund, I don't know, maybe 5,000 companies a year. So there's 5,000 companies a year, but something like 25 million companies start a year. So where did the other 24,995,000 companies go? Guess what? They didn't go to Sand Hill. So that's my take on it. Venture capital, to me, should be the last resort, not the first resort. It's a very, very different game.
That's a very good lesson for service companies, especially when some of them. In fact, when I first began one of my recent companies, I was reading all these startup books, and every single startup book was about raise capital, get a company and then sell it. And I'm like, well, what if I'm not? First of all, I had a service company. We produce content for other businesses, so it isn't like something you can go out and get in that for. But so finally, I just put down all the dozens of startup books I had because it didn't apply to a service company. And I like how you made it. You just made it clearer for me that I had a viable company. It was definitely viable, just wasn't fundable.
Well, I'll tell you, even better news is, let's say you have. At the beginning, you have the insight that this is a viable but not fundable company. Hallelujah. You're ahead of 95% of people right there, right? So now let's suppose you create this viable service company that you didn't think venture capitalists would touch. And then, hallelujah, lo and behold, it really takes off. And maybe along the way, you discover a product. So a viable company is, guess what? Viable. And as long as it's viable, you're in the freaking game. And if you're in the freaking game, maybe you will become fundable. Maybe you will discover a product. Who knows what's going to happen? But it only happens if you're viable. So the key is to be viable. If you're viable, then all sorts of opportunities may end up. But if you're not fundable and not viable, that means you're dead. And then there are no opportunities. So always be thinking viable. Like, I have a podcast, right? A podcast is not a venture capital deal. It never will be a venture capital deal. Now, maybe if I create such a good podcast and then I bring other podcasters into my fold and blah, 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 maybe I could end up being a modern media company. Don't hold your breath, Lee. But I mean, I'm making this bullshit up. But, it all starts with viability, though.
Yeah. Well, I want to get to the podcast in a moment, and I want to get there through getting a little bit deeper into learning about your personal experiences, because there's so much wisdom there that I could dig into that all day. And I know I just recently purchased your book, Wise Guy. I haven't gotten into it yet, but I'm looking forward to it. So if I ask something about the book and you want to just say, "Hey, Lee, it's in the book,"
no, I don't do that. You know who gives the answers like that?
Who's that?
It's people who are so short-sighted that they think, "Oh, Lee, it's in the book," and your listeners are going to go run out and buy the book. It ain't going to happen. It ain't going to happen. So I would rather tell you everything I can about the book, and then maybe you'll buy it. But even if you don't, it doesn't really matter. See, right now I'm 67 years old, and I'm on a mission to help people become remarkable. And whether you buy my book to become remarkable, listen to my podcast to become remarkable, whether I invest in your company to make you remarkable or advise you, whatever, I don't really care. It's just I want to make people. When I die, I want people to say, "Man, that guy empowered a lot of people."
That is beautiful. And you've seen more and done more and can drop names with the best in the world. So
I can.
Yeah, definitely.
That I can do.
But when you speak, you're the most humble and modest person. And I've even heard you say, "I'm no big deal." So
I am no big deal.
Is that just your personality, or do you have a methodology to staying grounded?
Shit.
I think there's an answer in that. That's the answer right there.
That's the answer right there. I mean, listen, if in a sense, it's almost oxymoronic. If you said to a person, "You're so humble, do you have a methodology to be humble?" I would say that proves arrogance, right? That like,
right there.
Oh yeah. I
my
figured
3
out
steps to be humble.
Exactly, right. In fact, I'm selling a book about it, and I have a seminar, and and for $1 million a year, you have 365-day access to my humility. Listen. Well, one thing is to have a very intelligent wife who just calls your bullshit. That I think that's probably 90% of the battle. But I was just never brought up that way. I don't take myself too serious. And listen, I don't want you to think I'm like some kind of humble guy walking around just staring at the ground all day, all right? So, I drive a German car. So, I don't know. I've had a very good life. And not Bill Gates, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos billionaire life, but I've had a very good life. You can call those
guys though.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. I have, I have wife 1.0. She has husband 1.0. We have 4 kids, and they still hang out with us. And so, I'm basically healthy. I've kind of lost my hearing, but that's because of all the dumb shit pitches I've had to listen to in my life. But
are you saying that some of the pitches were so bad they ate away at your ears?
It's an occupational hazard, man. I should get OSHA for this, but anyway, I need a disability.
I'd love to hear you tell somebody, "Look, I hear your pitch, but it is so bad it is literally eating away at the, the cells in my ear.
My brain, yeah.
Well, you mentioned family. I want to ask, because I think that a person's family is core to who they end up being. I mean, it may be, they may diverge here or there, but I think it's definitely a starting point. So I'm about to dig into your book, and whenever I read an inspirational or self-help book, I'm reminded, usually I hear stories that remind me of things my dad taught me.
Yeah.
And he once told me that if he lost everything today, he would recover in a short amount of time. And I asked him, how do you figure that? He said, well, I'll give you an example. I'll ask someone if I can rake their leaves from their yard with their rake. And then when they pay you, you buy your own rake. And then when you rake enough yards, you hire somebody to work with you, your friend. And the next thing you know, you have a landscaping company. And so I've always had that story in my head from my dad teach me that. And
your dad is a better dad than mine. Or no, I said that wrong. Your dad is a better dad than I am a dad. if I lost everything today, I would, I don't know. I can't tell you I could get it all back.
I think you would.
Nah.
Well, I mean, how does maybe some of your upbringing and some of your background affect how you operate today?
I think it affects completely how I operate today. I was brought up with a sense of, that that you got to earn what you get, that even earning what you get, luck plays a great deal role in where you are. The difference between me and somebody who's starving in some basement, worried about getting shot by a Russian, is just the flip of a coin. There's no reason why, I'm just dog shit lucky. Now, there may be people luckier than me, but there are plenty of people who are not as lucky as me. And so I don't wake up in the morning and think, I deserve this. I'm not like, oh, I deserve to live in Mar-a-Lago. I deserve to have my tower named after me. I don't believe that at all. I think I am just freaking lucky. Now, I am lucky, but I also worked my ass off. Because there are people who are lucky who don't work their ass off, right? Mm-hmm. So when you have both, you really become powerful. But you have to, that combination doesn't always come together.
Yeah. Well, in your career of working your ass off, you've made a lot of pivots, and a lot of them have been kind of ballsy in terms of making a pivot. So is there anything that kind of signals to you that maybe this is a time for a pivot, or gives you confidence that a pivot makes sense?
Well, you're giving me too much credit for analytical ability. So I've, from the outside looking in, I admit that you could think, wow, guy, you are so freaking smart. So you figured out personal computers, and then you pivoted to software, and then you pivoted to internet, and then you pivoted to social media, and then you pivoted to software as a service, Canva, and then you pivoted to media creation, podcasting. If you want to believe that, God bless you. I am not going to change your mind that I am so smart and I made all these great decisions. But if you want to hear the truth is, many times I was in the right place at the right time among the right people. And many times I just fell in love with stuff. I fell in love with the Apple II. I fell in love with Macintosh. I fell in love with Canva. I fell in love with Motorola phones when I worked with Google. I fell in love with a lot of things. I fell in love with podcasting. Now, don't get me wrong. I fell in love with a lot of things that didn't work out either. More, probably. So to think that I sat down and did an analytical McKinsey-esque Boston Consulting Group, Bain, Magic Quadrant, 2x2 matrix to analyze my plans is a falsehood. I just fell in love, and thank God every once in a while I fell in love with a winner. That's the secret to my life.
Well, you've been consistent. I mean, you gave numbers like 27 out of 30, and those three were the winners. But maybe too many people only try 3 and never make it to 30.
That's true. But you know what? Now let's you saying that I believe that is statistically probably true. But let us, in a rare moment of humility, let us also factor in the fact that I have been fortunate enough to be able to take 27 things back. Right? Mm-hmm. So if I were born in abject poverty, or abject poverty, what's the word? If I were born in deep poverty, maybe I would not have had the opportunity to swing 27 or 30 times. Maybe I would be so busy working 2 jobs. Maybe I would be a single dad. Maybe I would have health issues. Maybe I would not have been fortunate enough where my family made a sacrifice so that I could go to a private school, so that I could go into Stanford, so I could meet the guy who gave me a job at Apple, and the rest is history. So just saying that, well, the reason why a guy is successful is because he swung 30 times and he connected 3 times. You also have to really seriously ask the question, but how come he was lucky enough to swing 30 times? Because not everybody has the opportunity to swing 30 times.
I admire that you see that, because too many people, and this is just me venting, is that they get to a certain level, or they start at a certain level and have no vision of other scenarios that other people are in, have no understanding of their opportunity or of their path they took, that was their path, and everybody doesn't have that same opportunity, that same path. I
mean, you think that Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, you think they're sitting around thinking, oh man, I am lucky that,
It's like telling a fish about water.
You think that ever entered into their brain?
Yeah, it's explaining water to a fish. It's always been in there, so it's an assumption. Yeah. I won't keep you much longer, Guy. I mean, I'm really enjoying talking with you. You mentioned your podcast, though, and for me, the most fulfilling thing about doing this podcast is to share with my audience the lives and insights and stories of people like you. And I've heard you say that you were born to podcast, which made me smile when I heard you say that. But very few people have a contact list of remarkable people to reach out to.
That's right, baby.
Like you did.
Nobody can touch me there. I guess Joe Rogan can, but.
Well, I don't know about nowadays. It might not pick up the phone like they will for you. But so your podcast is called Remarkable People. So tell me about that and what your goals are behind it.
So Remarkable People podcast is one-on-one interviews between me and a remarkable person. And just FYI, my goal is to bring out the remarkableness in terms of experience, education, inspiration, whatever it is, of the other person. This is not about me positioning myself as remarkable. I am just the person who's the catalyst to get the other person's remarkableness out, okay? Mm-hmm. So what I'm trying to do is I am on a mission to make people remarkable. And I figured out that, Guy, you are not the monopoly of wisdom in the world. Duh. So people can learn from Jane Goodall. They can learn from Neil deGrasse Tyson. They can learn from Christy Yamaguchi, Ronnie Lott, Steve Wolfram, Steven Pinker, Scott Galloway, Gary Vaynerchuk, Seth Godin, Angela Duckworth, Katie Milkman, Bob Cialdini, David Acker. I can go on and on and on. And so I have basically a couple hundred of the most remarkable people in the world. Vivek Murthy, current Surgeon General, on my podcast talking about their experiences, what they learned, how they did things, etc., etc. And the whole point, and if you listen to my podcast, it is 95% the guest, 5% me. This is not me and somebody shooting the shit for 2 hours about, as peers. This is, I am trying to get them on the record and with all their information. It ain't about me spouting off about my theories at all. And I really consider it is the best work of my career. And if you're an entrepreneur, I would be astounded if you find a better collection other than your own podcast of information for entrepreneurs, because I have people like Wozniak. I have the founder of Poopery. Don't laugh at that. That woman has done a great job. Hint Water, Sarah Fry, who sells more pumpkins than anybody in the world. I just go down the line of particularly female entrepreneurs. Madison Reed, the hair dye mogul. And so I have I have entrepreneurs as inspiration. I also have people who can give you tips as entrepreneurs. For example, Bob Cialdini, the godfather of influence. David Ocker, the godfather of branding. Angela Duckworth, the godmother of grit. And I just go down the line because one of the things that has enabled me to be a good podcaster is I have been on the firing line for 30 or 40 years. Right? So I have been an entrepreneur. I know what it takes to screw up a product introduction. I know what it takes to not know who to hire, how to hire, who to fire, all that kind of stuff. I have been there. So I can ask the questions. Whereas I would say as someone who's been a professional journalist or a professional host his or her entire career doesn't, because they've never had to raise money, right? They've never had to beg a customer to try it. They've never been rejected day after day by customers. And so when you don't have that kind of experience because you weren't on the firing line, it's very hard to ask the really insightful question. I mean, you can ask the question like, what was it like to be an entrepreneur? Right? That's how NPR does it. What was it like to be an entrepreneur? That's a total bullshit question. What's the entrepreneur going to say? It was shit, Terry. I was rejected 9 times out of 10. 300 venture capitalists turned me down. Finally, I just scraped together what I could, and then I lied to my parents, and this is what I did to do it. That's what you want to hear. And so that's what I get to. That's what I get to.
This is kind of meta, because as I was looking at your podcast, and I realized I'm kind of like the very base of the mountain of what you're doing, because I'm talking with you. You're a remarkable person to me. And we've even, a couple of people you've interviewed, I've actually interviewed as well. And,
yeah.
And the fun part is, though, someone asked me, and I never did this to intend to be an interviewer or to say, I don't have any method behind this other than I ask questions that I just simply want to know. I don't do a ton of research.
That's
other than
a
know
method.
Who the person is. Maybe that's a method, because if I see you somewhere speaking or video, I'll go, why would he say that? And you know what? Make a note. Maybe I'll get a chance to ask him one day, And I think, I want to know it. Does anybody else want to know it? Then that makes it a viable question to ask.
That's true.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is a good algorithm. If I want to know it, somebody else want to know it, assuming that you're not an idiot. I don't mean you. I mean, assuming that the person thinking that is not an idiot.
True that. And it's typically within industry too. Because I asked you about the service versus product in terms of funding. I literally wanted to know that. I wanted to know guys' view on that, because I've been there, and it isn't just a question that I got from someone else's question. I actually wanted to know the damn answer. That's why I asked you. So I really appreciate that.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad I was able to switch my doctor's appointment off and actually do this. Do you know that? So yesterday I canceled, right? Uh-huh. And then the next opening was July. I don't know if that's because of me or you. This is April. May, June, July? What happened for 3 months? Are you on a sabbatical?
Yeah, they're on vacation, I guess. Oh, you mean for my schedule or theirs? The doctor.
I don't know if it was my schedule or your schedule, but I canceled us yesterday because of my medical thing. Oh, and then what came back was, okay, so we're going to do it July 6th. July 6th? What?
Yeah, I asked my assistant to only book one guest per week to record. And so she said, well, you're booked out to July. And I said,
okay.
But, for Guy, whenever Guy's available, I'll be available. So I'll do 2 in 1 week, 2 in 1 day if I need to. So.
I've done 2 a day. It's exhausting.
Yeah. I don't like to do 2 a day. I barely like to do 2 a week, because I want to make sure. Often I want to read their book. I want to know something about them more so.
See, you do research. You don't just show up.
Yeah, but I do the research to get my own questions, not to really understand the person.
So what's the difference?
I guess maybe not.
Yeah. Well, what I find hard is, sometimes I do 2 a day or 1 a day, 2 days in a row. And like one guy would be maybe a black activist, right? And the next day it's a female opera conductor. And then the next week it's Christy Yamaguchi figure skater. And then the next day it's marine biologist who runs the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So I have to be able to ask an intelligent question of a figure skater. The next day, a marine biologist. The next day, an astrophysicist, Neil deGrasse Tyson. And then, that's the nature of my life.
You got to research. I mean, at least if I ever had a weak moment, I could ask another marketing question that I may have asked 10 episodes ago. But in your case, you got to research.
No, now, you could make the case that your podcast is better focused. So maybe that's a better way to do it. But literally, I'm back-to-back marine biologist, figure skater, Ronnie Lott, free safety of the 49ers, to Neil deGrasse Tyson. And if nothing else, this podcast will probably at least delay my dementia, because there is no freaking way that I'm just sitting around watching Fox all day.
Yeah. Your mind is actually working and growing instead of
my mind is working harder and faster than it ever has in its life. So
well, let me before we wrap up, a quick peek behind the curtain here. This is a kind of meta. We talked about the guest you have, and you're my guest right now. I'm curious. This might get me in trouble here. I'm curious. And I'll cut it out if you say something that hurts. Maybe I won't. Why? What encouraged you to actually join me on this podcast?
Okay. So I suppose that I could give you a question that I did an extensive intellectual analysis of your demographic reach, of your content. I listened to past episodes. I did the research. I looked in your LinkedIn profile. I checked if you're on Wikipedia. I asked for other people who we have shared as common guests what they thought of you. If you want to believe that, God bless you. God bless you. There's tooth fairy, unicorns fart, pixie dust too. All of those things are true. So why did I accept you? Because frankly, I don't freaking remember. I don't remember. I get these requests, and if it's decent, and if it shows some specificity and some relevance, it's like not like I'm a hairdresser and I want to interview you for my podcast. Although even that I might take just out of curiosity. So basically, I kind of have this attitude in life, like I default to yes. So I'm yes until no. And so, I am not making this up.
Yeah.
I don't remember your pitch at all.
Yeah.
I just told my assistant, just say yes. Go ahead. Let's do it. Because like right now, I'm in build mode for my podcast. So I don't know if you have 500, 50 of your relatives, 5,000, 50,000, 500,000, or 5 million listeners. I don't know if you're the Black Joe Rogan. For all I know, you're the freaking Jack Blow Rogan, okay? And so I say yes because I figure, well, he's going to have more than his relatives. And so, you just never know.
I like your answer because I'm often talking to podcasters or people who want to do a podcast.
Yeah.
And they say they have problems getting guests. And I'm like, are you asking? Because, people who understand content, we understand. In fact, I have a seminar, I don't have a book, on being content, helping executives be the content that other people consume. And right now, podcasting is a great way to do that.
Well, I'll give you a dirty little secret is that, you find out there's one firm called Fortier, Fortier, and they handle most of the business books, most of the nonfiction books, okay? Mm-hmm. And so guess what? When even Neil deGrasse Tyson is coming out with a new book, his PR firm is looking for podcasts for him to be on. As humble as Guy Kawasaki's little podcast is, Neil deGrasse Tyson will come on your podcast when he wants to pimp a book. Hallelujah, man. Take it. So that is tip number one. And I will also tell you that for me, this is going to weave into your story about just saying yes and, just ask. So I've come to believe it's not who you know, it's who knows of you. This is a big difference. So I'll tell you a story. So how did I get Jane Goodall on my podcast? Because I get an email from someone who runs the Palo Alto TEDx. I don't know who she is. She knows who I am because I'm in Silicon Valley and Apple and all that. So she says, I've seen you in action, blah, blah, blah. I have Jane Goodall coming and I need a moderator. Would you like to be a moderator? Well, no shit, Sherlock. Jane Goodall. I canceled a paid speech for that. That cost me tens of thousands of dollars to introduce Jane Goodall. So I interviewed Jane Goodall. Jane Goodall and I become friends. So I asked her to be my guest on my podcast. She's the first person I ever put on my podcast. Okay. So let's just say when you start with Jane Goodall, it's all downhill from there, right? Because nobody's going to say to you, so who's been on your podcast before? Jane Goodall. I've never heard of her. Is she a chef? My client likes to be on podcasts with famous people who have credibility, and I don't know who Jane Goodall is. Let's just say that didn't happen, right? So you get Jane Goodall, then you get Margaret Atwood, then you get Arianna Huffington, then you get Steve Wozniak. And, further down the line, you get Neil deGrasse Tyson and you get Steve Wolfram and you get MacArthur Award winners. And pretty soon, they're coming out of the woodwork trying to be on your podcast. I have the opposite problem now. Now, every day, I get 2 or 3 pitches from, how you're going to love I hope you got time.
I want to, because I'm feeling on that, because I get, after my first season, the script flipped. It went from us looking to having to turn down all these people trying to get on the podcast.
Okay, yeah. And so I get pitches from people every day. I'm Joe Blow, or hi, I'm Joe Blow's publicist. And he has just written a book called The Blow Way. It's published by Blow Press. And he's a 27-year-old millennial who has already figured out how to do almost 6 figures in management consulting and leadership training. So we think that he should be on your podcast. He could add a lot to your podcast. And sometimes I just give it to my virtual assistant and tell them, nope. That's my answer, NOPE, and she takes it from there. But sometimes when I'm in a bad mood, I toy with the person. And I say, so, pardon me, but I haven't heard of Joe Blow. Perhaps you could explain to me why he's as remarkable as Jane Goodall, Steve Wozniak, Margaret Atwood, and Arianna Huffington, and Christy Yamaguchi. And that ends the email thread.
These pitch companies, they don't do crap of research, I don't think.
No, they don't do shit. Yeah. It's like,
because they should look at your list of people and say, well, this guy, Joe Blow, he can't be in this list of people. So why
but
even
what?
pitch him?
But I got to tell you, every once in a while, though, don't get me wrong. My podcast is called Remarkable People, not Famous People. Yeah. So, would I take an LGBTQ activist that if you're not in the LGBTQ community, but let's say she's a LGBTQ or he or they is a LGBTQ activist in Florida fighting Ron DeSantis. Okay? Never heard of her. I'm not LGBTQ. I never heard of her, him, they, whatever it is. She is, they is. You know what I mean? Anyway, I don't want to get in trouble. Anyway, so I never heard of this person. Shit, yeah, I would take that person. Taking on Ron DeSantis, taking on the governor of, Texas. Hell yes, I would take that person. That's remarkable to me. So I'm going to finish off with one great story that illustrates this whole concept. I don't know if you've heard of Angela Duckworth, but she's the woman who wrote the book Grit, MacArthur Award winner for her work Grit. Okay. Mm-hmm. So I really wanted to get her. So, I send an email to info@AngelaDuckworth.com, whatever it is on her website, because I don't know her. I'm praying she recognizes my name from info@AngelaDuckworth.com. Nothing happens. Angela Duckworth doesn't know who Guy Kawasaki is. Okay. It's not like I'm Jared Kushner or somebody or Mitch McConnell's son. So a few weeks go by and kind of the Lee Judge phenomena. I accept going as a guest on a podcast from some podcast named Shoot the Moon or Over the Moon or Beyond the Moon, or I can't even remember. So I'm in this podcast. We're on this thing. We're starting the recording. And she says, let me give you a little background. I say, okay, because, you know my rigid process for determining what podcast to go on.
We've been through that, yeah.
So I'm in this podcast. I'm freaking in the middle of this podcast, Leah. I'm not thinking about being on this podcast. I'm not considering. I am in the podcast. And she says, well, I'm a 16-year-old girl in Arkansas, and I'm in intermediate school. And this is my podcast, Over the Moon, Shoot the Moon, Blue Moon, whatever the hell it was. And I'm on the other side thinking, guy, what the hell have you just done? Like, why are you going to take an hour of your life talking to a 15-year-old girl in Arkansas or Alabama or wherever? It doesn't matter. It could be California. It doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. But come to find out, she asks very, very good questions. Like very good, like better than most adult interviewers. All right. So then at the end of this podcast, I say to her, who else have you had on this podcast? And she says, well, I just had Angela Duckworth. My freaking jaw hits the floor. I said, you had Angela Duckworth. How did you get Angela Duckworth? She goes, well, I don't know. I wrote to info to Angela Duckworth. And I said, I'm a 16-year-old girl in Alabama with a podcast. And she said she'd come on. And I'm like, okay, my jaw is now beneath the floor, right?
Yeah.
I said, so that's how you got Angela Duckworth? She goes, yeah, I don't know. I guess she likes to support young girls in podcasts, so she came on my podcast. I said, well, can you write to Angela Duckworth for me and tell her to put me on the podcast? I mean, I'd like her on my podcast. She said, sure, I know Angela now. And so she introduces me to Angela, and Angela responds to me because of, Shoot the Moon Girl. Mm-hmm. And that's how I got Angela Duckworth on my podcast.
Wow.
So the moral of this story is indiscriminately help other people because you just never know how it's going to pay off.
That's right. Wow.
So for all I know, okay, so I'm working this angle. I'm gonna make this work. For all I know, Lee Judge, you are like the godson of Stacey Abrams, okay? And I'm telling you, my number one draft pick for anybody I could have on my podcast right now is Stacey Abrams. So I'm going to someday find somebody, and Lee Judge, you're going to say, Stacey Abrams is my godmother. My God. My family's originally from Georgia. We were neighbors, and she used to hold me on her lap. And Guy, I could call her right now and get you with her, and she will go on your podcast. I promise you, Grandma Stacey Abrams will do it. Someday that's going to happen. Tell me that's true. Is it true for you?
I might actually make that happen for you, so don't be surprised.
You see? And then
I'm in Atlanta, and so I'm right here. I can make it happen for you.
Okay, so in 6 months from now, I'm going to say, okay, you know how I got Stacey Abrams? The most important person who probably saved democracy in 2020. You know how I got her? Because I accepted a podcast with this marketing guy named Lee Judge. I had no idea who he was. I didn't know if he had 5 listeners, 50,000, or 50 million. But I said yes, and come to find out, he's Stacey Abrams' godson, and he got her for me. And that's how life works, punk, and that's what you should believe. So there you go.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I can't end on a better note than that, Guy.
Man. No, you cannot. Okay, Lee Judge, you have a good Thursday.
You too, man. Thanks again for listening. For joining. I was going to tell the listeners, thanks for them for listening. And if you want to see Guy and I, this has been a hilarious conversation, so you might want to see this one. You can see the podcast and all the others on contentmonster.com. Guy, thanks again, man. I love the conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Business of Marketing podcast, a show brought to you by ContentMonster.com, the producer of B2B digital marketing content. Show notes can be found on ContentMonster.com, as well as aleejudge.com. To continue the conversation, be sure to follow the podcast on your favorite podcast platform.